So it seems as though there's been a surge in neurodivergent cases such as ADHD, autism, and the like over the past couple of years. If you feel like that's been the case, then you're in the right place because that's what we're going to be discussing in today's episode. Hello and welcome to Life Divergent. I'm Trina.
And I'm Jason. So, before we get started, quick reminder that we are not doctors or licensed medical professionals. The stories, ideas, and experiences that are on this podcast are for informational purposes only. Please do not use this as a substitute for professional medical advice. Always consult with your healthcare provider for any health concerns or before making any changes to your wellness routine.
All right. So, I think that what we've seen rather than an epidemic of neurodivergence is an epidemic of diagnosis. So the surge has been driven by visibility and diagnosis finally catching up to reality that's always existed. So it's not by more neurodivergent people being born. It's just that we've become more aware.
The leading health and psychological bodies really do agree with this reframing. Again, it's what you're saying, epidemic of diagnosis, not of neurodivergence.
Correct.
It's really about awareness.
Right.
So we're identifying 6 major shifts behind the numbers. I'm sure there are several others, various perspectives you can argue. We have 6 that we'd like to focus on today.
Right. So the first one is broadened diagnostic criteria. Over time, since 1980, I think the DSM, which was DSM-3 in 1980, has changed 3 different times so that now we're at the DSM-5 TR. And we've moved from more rigid, narrow definitions to more spectrum-based models. And in that, we've been capturing certain things that previously weren't considered in the diagnostic criteria for things like, autism and ADHD.
The brain is a magical place. No 2 brains are the same, so you can't really put people in a diagnostic box without there being a spectrum model.
Right. I know that, some healthcare professionals have been concerned that by broadening these definitions that we're pathologizing people, leading more people or more doctors to see certain mental illnesses in people where they don't necessarily exist.
Like if someone has a regular, normal human trait that's neurotypical, what the pathologizing is seeing that, saying, oh, I've seen this in neurodivergence, so we're going to treat it as if it's neurodivergence. Is that what you were saying?
Right, exactly. Okay. That. All right, so in the 1980s, as I kind of touched on, autism was typically diagnosed only in cases where people had severe developmental delays or they had nonverbal traits. The parameters really left many people who had, other traits besides nonverbal traits and certain developmental traits were just kind of left out, hanging out in the wind. They were just seen as peculiar or odd. They weren't really recognized as being neurodivergent. So people who had high ability that exhibited traits were just seen as quirky or eccentric or just basically odd. That has changed now since we have more of a spectrum model.
Yeah, now people, instead of being dismissed as quirky and eccentric or odd, are now being embraced as such.
Right. I think that, what's interesting is that it used to focus on people who were developmentally delayed, and that could have been in a lot of ways, but particularly brain wise. And now, of course, the spectrum has increased to include people who are, excuse me for the little kitty cat, but with high cognitive ability. Um, Nowadays, traits are recognized rather than being overlooked. And another thing is that more recently, it used to be true that the DSM didn't allow for comorbidity. In other words, it didn't allow people who were diagnosed with autism to also be diagnosed with ADHD. So, of course, before there was a spectrum, people weren't seen as on the autism spectrum. But, the other thing is the more that we recognize that people can have traits from one area and traits from another area, that they could have coexisting conditions. So, yeah, that was another thing that broadened the diagnostic criteria of things.
All right. Another thing is, well, overlooked demographics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not the driver, but catching up.
Right.
Back in the day, early research focused almost entirely on young boys. And now clinicians are recognizing how traits present across all genders, ethnicities, and ages.
Right.
So women and girls would often socialize to mask, right? They forced eye contact, they copied social scripts. As
Yeah, back
this
in
is
my
an
day.
interesting topic because of,
Well, it used to be like, girls and boys, many years ago back in my day,
Yeah.
there was a difference in the way that girls and boys were expected to act, to behave. Girls, sat still, kept their mouths shut, didn't speak until they were spoken to. I mean, children, that was true about, but when boys acted out or just behaved differently, that boys were being boys, but the
Yeah.
expectation that girls had certain social etiquette that they had to live up to was more so than for boys, I believe.
Yeah, and the thing about women and girls was, again, back in the day, if they, acted up or demonstrated different neurodivergences, they were being uppity or on their period or something,
Yes, exactly. All right, let me move.
So there was more inclination to see. It's weird to say this because we're talking about back then, you know what I mean? It's not now. It's like back then they had to behave normally.
Right. Yeah, it
anyway,
wasn't easy being a little girl growing up who had certain proclivities for
yeah, I
falling
never
off
had that experience.
benches or yeah.
So the masking was needed, especially from clinicians, and what the result was, decades of an underdiagnosis in that specific gender.
Right.
And what we're finding now is we have a large wave of adults seeking that late stage diagnosis.
Right.
So it seems like there's this explosion in neurodivergence. Now we're just recognizing it, kind of as we said in the beginning. And a lot of people, parents, like a lot of parents, recognize these things in themselves only after their children or a child is diagnosed. A doctor does a routine thing, recognizes it. Parent says, all of those qualities that are being called out, I have as well.
Especially the more we know, when we're starting to realize that certain traits are hereditary. We didn't really know that so much back then. Like when you were a child, for people who don't know, Jason's my son. And another thing is
And another thing.
Are you going to say another thing?
No, I was just being funny.
And another thing is that, like when Jason was a child, Jason was gifted. And we moved him from one school to another in the middle of kindergarten. And when he was in kindergarten, it became all the rage to say that children had ADHD. So it was a recognition, but I also felt like at the time that children were being overdiagnosed. Those children who, I don't want to say didn't fit in, but were outside of the norm as far as being able to be controlled, or who were advanced intellectually, for example, like Jason was. They were like, oh, he has ADHD. And although now we know that Jason did have ADHD, that wasn't why he stood out from the crowd. It was because we took him from one school to another, and he was much advanced over what they were teaching at.
You're going to say much better, huh?
What'd I say?
You said much advanced or much more advanced. Just, I thought you were going to say much better. But maybe that's wishful thinking.
Yes. Anyway, he was more advanced, there we go, than the other children in terms of mathematics and reading and all of that kind of thing. So my thought at the time was that they were just throwing him a label because of the fact that he was advanced over the children in his class. Anyway, and the other thing is, which when we were talking earlier, I pointed out to you that because I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until like a year ago or so, I probably wouldn't have recognized the traits in you if they existed in me, because I didn't know that I had it. And when you have certain characteristics or traits all of your life, you don't realize that they're uncommon. You just think everyone's like that. And so when you have a child that exhibits those same traits, of course, that's just the way that you are,
It's like not knowing you need glasses until someone points it out somehow.
Right. You don't know your sight's impaired until you know your sight's impaired. So, yeah. Okay, so I think another thing that over time, back in my day, again with that, is that if you were diagnosed with any sort of mental illness, as I said, ADHD really only exploded in like the late 80s, early 90s, at least as far as I know. Before that, like if you ever said that someone had a mental illness, even at that time, it could carry a really heavy stigma with it, because we used to think that people were just crazy. Again, we just discussed what an autism diagnosis meant. And so since we've reframed these conditions, and have been able to see that it's just a difference in brain wiring instead of being deficits or being something to be ashamed of. It used to really carry a heavy cost with it. I got distracted while I was talking by my own thoughts. But there was also the risk of alienation, the fear of being institutionalized if you were mentally ill. So people weren't really seen as mentally ill back in my day unless, it was a very serious problem, something that could definitely get you institutionalized. So there was also like considerable denial. People didn't believe that mental illness existed, even though they could acknowledge that people's hearts might be different from one another, that someone could have a heart condition, or that someone might have, liver problems, or just whatever. For some reason, people couldn't get it through their heads that the brain could also vary, from one person to another.
And even if you say, like, some people might have the argument, well, a heart condition's like a physical thing that you can measure or see. It's like, well, anytime you say someone is genetically predisposed, you're not, well, you're going to say you're looking at their genetics to see that? I mean, we're at like a chemical level here. Like, why is it all of a sudden taken less seriously when you're talking about the brain? Like, none of this really
Right.
makes sense, but for some reason that's there, that negative stigma, less so now, but I just
Right.
don't get it.
I think it's because, there was so much mystery surrounding the brain, perhaps.
Yeah.
We certainly have come a long way in what we know, in the past 50 years. Heck, in the last, 10 or 20 years, we've come so far. But so I think that the more that we understand the brain, and the more we understand hereditary conditions and neurotransmission, which is in the brain, the more we understand the human body in general, the more that we've been able to see that, well, there are differences, and we've been able to shift the perception of people who are neurodivergent. So again, it's a brain wiring difference, not a moral deficit, not an intellectual deficit necessarily.
People really think it's a moral deficit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to some extent there are still some people who think that people who have ADHD, for example, there's still stigma, so people who have ADHD who struggle with things like executive dysfunction, for example, things like not being able to take care of yourself, not being able to adult properly, not being able to motivate. I hate to use the word motivate because that's really inaccurate, but being able to go and do the dishes, for example, or just, it's seen as a moral deficit, like, oh my gosh, the whole thing, cleanliness is next to godliness or whatever. You're just seen as lazy, that
Right.
you're a bad person for being lazy. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ways that mental illness has been seen as a moral deficit that,
I get that now. Okay.
Okay.
So that is disappointing, but that's how it's been, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like, you're just making excuses.
Yeah,
Or,
exactly.
now you're just lazy. What are you talking about? You're not
Yeah.
paying attention
Right.
because you're being disrespectful.
Right. I mean, so many things that now we understand, that no, you weren't a bad person. No, you weren't being a bad girl or a bad boy, or, or a bad human in general. Now, I think that a lot of what has helped with kind of breaking down the social stigma, again, we still have ways to go. We're not quite there because people who don't have it, it's still difficult for them to understand what people with these conditions go through, especially if they aren't. This is going to sound terrible, but if you're not like college educated, or you've never taken psychology classes or physiological psychology classes, if you don't understand the way that the brain functions, for some reason, it is still difficult for people to understand that you might be wired differently. But a couple of things that have helped a lot is that a lot of high profile celebrities and different figures have come out and discussed the fact that they have neurodivergent conditions. And so when they are people who are considered to be well respected in the industry or whatever, and people look up to them, it makes it a lot easier, I think, for the average Joe to identify as neurodivergent as well. And as a result, we talk about it more, and conversations about this have been normalized kind of worldwide now as a result.
Which is why we can do this.
Yes, exactly.
Because it's normal.
Yeah, it's normal.
All right. And how do we know that? Because we have social media.
Yay for social media.
Like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, it lets people share their, like, the experiences of their lives, everything they go through, or whether it's an executive dysfunction, what that looks like, sensory overload, hyperfixations, whatever. People can
Right.
make YouTube shorts or TikToks or podcasts talking about their experiences and symptoms and all that.
Right.
And once that awareness is out there, people can realize that maybe they have what this person has. They'll recognize those similar conditions. That whole "I'm not alone" feeling is fantastic, because many people do feel like they're the only ones who feel the way that they do. Now,
That's huge. That is so huge, because again, like I even described with, having children, until like your children are diagnosed, you don't realize that there's something about you that's different. And so, yes, same thing here. Until people started talking about those things, you're just like, wait a minute. Do I have this also? So it's been great.
it's very relieving. I knew someone who didn't realize that the awareness was as big as it is. And I didn't know that the social acceptance is at the level it is. And when that person was diagnosed with ADHD, one of the first things that I heard from said person was, "Why is there something wrong with me?" It's like, well, no,
Right.
there's not. I'm sorry that that's been the life you've lived, and that's how people have been treating it. But it's normally abnormal. I don't know how you might want to say it, but having something like this to struggle through is kind of more common than some people think.
Right.
So experts have really put, I don't even know how to word what I'm trying to say, but there are a lot of the experts in the field who recognize that social media and that type of awareness is extremely powerful. It's a powerful gateway to getting formal support. You have the recognition, and you can talk to someone about the thing that you recognized.
I think what's also made it really nice is that there are so many doctors and psychiatrists. I know psychiatrists are doctors also, but there are so many different people online who are professionals in the field now, who are talking about neurodivergence and normalizing it, and just in the way that they discuss it. It lends to this idea that people are now seeking support because of, not only because of their peers or because of celebrities or whatever, because of the doctors that are online now discussing these things openly.
There is something to be aware of, a caveat, if you will. As fantastic as social media is for awareness, it can lead people to self-diagnose. I have met many people who have said, "Oh, well, I haven't been diagnosed with this, but I'm pretty sure I have XYZ." Well, maybe you do, or maybe you're going to misunderstand what the struggles really are.
Right.
And if you don't know what you are really suffering through and think it's one thing and not another, the processes that are designed to help people with X condition aren't working for you because you actually have Y condition but don't know it, which can be significantly more discouraging. And then you might feel even more alone, or like you're beyond help, which isn't the case.
Right.
So self-diagnosis is a bad thing. We can't emphasize that enough.
Well, I think that it can be a tool to be used to get you on your path.
Recognition
Yeah,
is a good tool.
to guide you in the right direction. However, it's important to be aware that there is misinformation because, we are in the age of misinformation. So, do your best to gather the information, but not to take it to heart until you speak to a professional.
Remember, the content you see on social media, it's a great starting point. It's not a diagnosis, not a clinical verdict. It is a way you can figure out what questions to ask. So, again, see a licensed medical professional.
Correct. All right. So now we move on to, oh my gosh, hold on. Got a kitty in my way.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
We're on our 5th point.
We are. So there's this thing that's called like the modern pressure cooker. So even though our core genetics have stayed the same, one thing that has not stayed the same over time is that the world has changed. And with me being 61 years old, I can tell you it's changed a lot. So the way that the modern world works can make people more aware of, I don't want to say their limitations, but of the way that they are functioning in the world. So a good example that I like to use is back in the day, if you were and pardon the word, but it was the term that was used, a secretary. If you were a secretary, your primary function was to type letters, maybe open the mail and answer the phone and direct phone calls to a particular boss.
Yeah, the men usually.
Huh?
The men usually.
Yes, exactly. So you had one person you reported to, and you had like maybe three functions, as I just outlined. But as time has changed and we've come into the modern age of computers and everything's fast, and it's just nice sound effect. You've become more of a multifaceted employee. Instead of specializing, now you have become an administrative assistant. And an administrative assistant's job tends to be so much more than, typing, filing, answering the phones. And more jobs have become that, just multifaceted rather than, you specializing. There are fewer specialists now. There are people who can do multiple things. The world has become more demanding, and as such, it requires people to manage their cognitive limitations now. We have just the way that workspaces are structured. Again, the demand of what's required of us. And you have open plan offices, which make it so much more apparent that there are certain things that, distractions and so forth. Also doing digital work. Again, like when you're on the computer, you're answering emails, you're on the phone. In a job we used to have, gosh, a place that we worked together, we probably had 20 different functions that we had to do. And we had to work on each one of those functions throughout a given day. And you had to be able to switch from task to task easily. And as we know, as some of us know, there are some people who are limited in their ability to be able to do that. So the modern age has really made it more difficult to be neurodivergent, with it going unnoticed, so to speak. And then when we had COVID and people were out of jobs, or the ones that were forced to work from home, routines were shattered. People had to figure out how to function, at home, and they kind of set their own routines because there wasn't someone looking over their shoulder or whatever. There was forced isolation and loss of structure. Um, so for some people who are neurodivergent, they really depend on that structure very greatly, especially the ones who have difficulty structuring things for themselves or staying focused or not hyper focusing.
People on the spectrum who need very specific schedules, very specific structure, and all of a sudden that gets just destroyed and you got to rebuild everything from scratch. That can be kind of devastating because you just have your routine broken.
Right.
You just can't.
You just can't. You can't. You can't can. So, and then when people re-entered, I don't want to say the workforce, but those people who then had to go back to work in office spaces and everything, they had been able to work from home and their masks were stripped to an extent because they were at home. They could function the way that they normally would unless they were forced to be on the phone or in a conference call or something like that. They could do their jobs. Again, the whole structure issues, but they weren't being forced to mask because they were at home. And
I don't know how to be around people anymore.
Yeah, they were alone.
I work from home.
So therein led to issues when people who had been out of office work and been working from home for a couple of years, all of a sudden they had lost their propensity for masking, I guess. And so re-entering the workplace really made it difficult for people to function. And by unmasking, your traits were pushed to the surface. Again, you were allowed to be who you were. And you could be comfortable being who you were because you didn't have the social pressures. So it just made it more difficult for people re-entering the office spaces.
And that leads us to the sixth driver of, what do we say, systemic shift to...
Yeah, more diagnosis.
Words escape me today. It's when people recognized that there were these parts about them that made it difficult to function in a working environment or academic environment. There became more incentive to accommodate that. And with various state and federal legislature, what's the word? Why can't I say that?
Legislative? Usually it's you who's helping me with pronouncing words. I don't know how we flipped the script today, but legislative?
Statutes.
Oh, sure. Legislation.
That's the word. Okay, we'll just say that.
For workplace accommodations.
Yes, I actually have a workplace accommodation. And I'm very, very fortunate for that because the whole return to office thing it was a lot. But it used to be that people would have to conceal their struggles and perhaps not perform as well as they wanted to. Diagnosis would kind of risk their professional life. I certainly wouldn't want anything like that to get out. It's like, oh, don't give this project to so-and-so. He's has ADHD. He's just going to get distracted and not do it.
You're going to cry like a little girl.
There's that too.
That goes along with that stigma that used to exist, right?
It's like it used to be that mental health days were problems. Sometimes you just need to decompress.
Right.
There's a lot that happens. But now people can embrace that. Like I mentioned before, there are some legal protections for the workplace.
Uh-oh.
I hear cats fighting over there.
Mm-hmm.
So there are now incentives to seek an official label, assuming that is something that can be done, that what you have is it warrants a label and something can be done with it from an accommodation perspective.
Right.
But it's great that this is serious enough and being taken seriously enough that one, people are looking for that, but two, that it's even there in the first place, being able to be accommodated.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and yes. What's really nice is we're reaching back further than just adults in the workplace, and it's going into academic circles, not only college, but elementary school, high school, and so on, where people are getting accommodations. Like they'll have, what's it called, an LEP? I can't remember what it stands for, but a special learning thing in place, a special learning program to accommodate them. So, yeah, and a lot of those people are, getting older now. When was COVID?
2020,
2021.
2020.
Yeah. So, yeah, and some of those people are coming into the workplace now and free to do it as they are.
Man, my brain is not braining today.
That's okay. You have ADHD.
I felt like I was on point going through the day. I'm like, man, I must have gotten a good amount of sleep. I'm sharp as a tack. I'm doing everything correctly and quickly the first time. And then I come here and I'm yawning. I don't know how words work. I can't speak really well at all. It's just chaos.
Yeah, well, so yeah, I mean, it's really nice that because of everything that we've mentioned, that it's become more acceptable, and there's more incentive for people to be more open about their diagnoses once they have them. And the fact that, I mean, it's kind of cyclical, the fact that these accommodations exist now, it's like, oh, well, maybe I should get an official label, seek, medical help so that I can have an official label so that I can qualify for these accommodations that will make work easier for me. So it's really nice.
Big takeaway is, along our title, along our theme is, why this explosion in neurodivergence? Well, there isn't one.
Right.
It's just always been here, just didn't have a good flashlight.
Right.
I combined
you who hates analogies.
Well, it's like I was trying to do two different things, and now it's like we have flashlights.
Cheers.
Flashlights.
Yep.
Like if you can only see a part of a mural with the little flashlights, it's all dark, and then you're like, oh, well, so what? You get a better flashlight, now all of a sudden do you say, we can see this whole mural now, or do you say this mural must have grown out of nowhere? Like, that's not how it works. Just
right.
See what's around you.
Who came in here and worked while it was dark and made it bigger?
Yeah.
All right. Well, so what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments. Do you feel like by broadening the awareness that people are being over pathologized? Are we seeing mental health traits where they don't exist? Have we let too many people in, so to speak?
Let too many people in? Like
yes, into our secret little neurodivergent club.
Yeah, it's a club. The bouncer's off duty right now. I don't know what they're doing, letting so many people in, but
right, knock it off, shut the door.
Question for you all: does the label free people, or does it box them in? And I have heard both arguments. I have my own perspectives, but curious about yours.
Yeah, and so what do you think is owed to adults, if anything, who went undiagnosed for decades?
Reparations.
Yay! And then, Jason, you brought up an interesting point when we
Did
were
I?
talking earlier. Yes, you did. Believe it or not. Surprise, surprise. Um, you said that someone had asked you, do you feel like your life would have been different if you had been diagnosed sooner? And we had a little conversation about that. But I'm curious to know if any of the listeners believe, anyone who was diagnosed late, if they feel like their lives would have been different, significantly different, if they had had a diagnosis earlier in life.
And which do you think would have been better? Having the early diagnosis or living the life that you've had, assuming
Right,
you didn't have an early diagnosis? Okay.
right. And if you feel like there are significant differences that would have applied in your life, let us know what those are. All right. So I believe that we're wrapping up. So I want to let you guys know that in our next episode, we're going to be talking about the difference between masking and coping mechanisms. Yeah, just what's the difference between the two. So until next time, I'm Trina.
I'm Jason.
Bye.